Hi everybody, this is Mr. Nolan, and what I would like to do with you today in this video is to discuss examples in which the role of randomness occurs in evolution. So we earlier looked at natural selection and artificial selection, where the traits, really this is not a random process, where you have all this variety of traits. Some of them are actually better than others because they confer a reproductive advantage. Some of them could be actually a hindrance or a disadvantage, which is why those numbers decrease. But we also saw in the koi fish pond example that sometimes a trait can increase or decrease in its frequency, not because it's any better or any worse, but really just because of the winds of fate. Because it just that population's genes literally drift in one direction or another. But we're going to look at two specific examples of genetic drift in which there's another factor involved where it's still random, but there are specific examples in which an event causes our population to randomly change. So it's still random, but it is actually caused by a specific discrete event. So let's go ahead. I want to show you the simulator that we're going to use in order to understand this concept, and we'll talk about a couple of examples. The simulator, you can find it in the informational section at the bottom of this video. So if you want to use the simulator, feel free to go online and take a look at that. So let's go over to this simulator, and this is at virtualbiologylab.org. And as you look at this simulator, what we observe before we even start anything is, I want to point out a few things that we observe here. One of them is that we have a mainland population and we have some islands. And I'm going to increase the speed here. So we're going to observe one kind of genetic drift that is caused by a migration event. And so what we have here is we have a mainland, which means that like a continent, some sort of terrestrial environment. And then we also have some islands. Now we have to assume that any species that show up on a small island probably did not really start there. They didn't first appear there and then evolve over time. They were probably swept to that island from a mainland. And we see that in almost every island that you can think of, or any island that scientists have visited and looked at the populations. They observe that the species found on those islands can be traced to mainland ancestors. And so really this begs the question, what does that process do to the allele frequencies or to that population? So this simulator is going to simulate taking a small group of individuals and flinging them onto an island sort of by a random sort of migration event, and seeing how that compares, how they change over time as they reproduce, and do we observe differences in those populations. So this is called the founder effect. And the reason why it's called the founder effect, we'll talk about in one moment. So before we actually start the simulator, look at this mainland population. This is one species, but they come in a variety of different colors, and the reason is that they have a variety of different alleles. So down here we have yellow, and in this case right now the yellow is starting at about 10%. So about 10% of these organisms have the yellow allele in them. They aren't necessarily all yellow. If you look carefully, I only find about 4 or 5 yellow, maybe 6 yellow individuals. But it says that 10% of them have yellow. Well, the reason for that is we don't only just have yellow, we also have orange and we also have green. And both of those you can produce by combining yellow with another color. Blue is present in about half of the population, and red is present in about half of the population, a little less. And so just to be perfectly clear what we're looking at, if I were to combine, let's say, red and yellow together, I get an orange individual. If I combine blue and red, I end up with a purple one, and if I combine yellow and blue, I end up with a green one. And so that kind of explains how those frequencies result in what we see in our population above and to the left. So let's go ahead and actually colonize our island. And so what I've essentially done is I have taken, let's say, a random pregnant female, and I have, she's ended up on this island. Maybe there was a big storm, maybe she hitched a ride on a boat, and that humans were transporting between the island and the mainland. Any variety of situations could result in that organism being swept onto this island. And notice that she's really the only one there. It's a very small population. Basically, we have one. You can play with the simulator in order to change that. But let's observe the founder effect at play here. If I let the simulator run, what's going to happen? How is this population's the frequency is going to compare with the mainland? So let's go ahead. I'm going to click go. And so we're going to let time pass. And at the left over here, you can see how these population numbers are changing over time. All right, so as we sit there and we watch, we only have to watch it for a few seconds. I'm going to pause it. And if I pause it, go ahead and look at the differences that we observe between our mainland, our original population, very high diversity, with what we observe over here with our island population, really low diversity. There's actually not a single yellow allele there. Now, I want to clarify, that's not because that yellow is not a good allele for this island. There is no reproductive advantage conferred for color in this case, which is what makes this drift. That pregnant female, that dot, the first dot that showed up in Island 1, she didn't show up for any reason. She was just blown over onto the island. And so this small population is still a small population. It's essentially inbred, really, is what it is that these are all kind of closely related. And we actually see a reduction in diversity because only a few of these individuals on the left showed up on that island, again, just randomly. We don't have any yellow alleles at all. All of the alleles are blue and red. And in fact, blue is actually unusual enough that we don't even find any blue individuals. We just find red and purple. So this is an example of the founder effect, and we can also observe that if the island is farther from the mainland, we observe that it's less and less diverse. Really, it's more and more, I guess, different from the original population. We could go into all kinds of specifics about how geographical distance affects the founder effect, but that's the object of this simulator, is to show founder effect. But there's one more thing that we can do with this simulator. So I want to jump back here to our presentation. So, to summarize the founder effect, by random chance, a small population migrates away from the original larger population. We observe this effect on islands, and new arrivals are the founders of the island population. So let's look at another example. Let's look at an example in which something else is going on here. So I'm going to go back here. I'm just going to go ahead and reset this. Okay, so I've reset our simulator. We'll bring our speed back up. And we see we have this original population. The alleles are pretty much at the percentages that they were. This is random, really. So I've got my original population again. We're going to look at another situation. If I look over here at the left, this says bottleneck, right? This is an effect that we're going to look at. So let's observe what happens when we run the simulator and then click on bottleneck. So first of all, let's just see what happens if we simply just run the simulator. So we can see that our alleles are more or less stable. It looks like red is going up and blue is going down a little, but they seem to be relatively stable. If I, click bottleneck, notice that it killed off almost everybody. And coincidentally, actually, when we take a close look at this, I'm going to pause. It just so happens that when that bottleneck event happened, really, what would we call that? That was a catastrophic event. It was a catastrophe. Almost everybody died for a short time, and then they kind of bounced back. They came back. But I want us to sort of zoom in on the lower left here. I want you to look at this graph. This graph is actually quite illuminating. So our graph shows that there was this big bottleneck event, and right away, by random chance, all of the yellow alleles went extinct. They all died. So any individuals that just so happened to have a yellow allele died. Again, I must stress, that's not because yellow was not a good allele. It's because it was just unlucky. The universe rolled the dice and yellow lost. And so now what we observe is that our population is entirely red and blue. And of course, because this is an incompletely dominant trait, red plus blue gives you purple. And so we see, yes, we find some other diversity in there, but that's only because of the way the gene interactions, the allele interactions. So this is a bottleneck. And one notable example that everybody brings up when we talk about bottlenecks are cheetahs. And so cheetahs actually at one time, their population was reduced to maybe even just a few dozen individuals. So they might have actually looked like our original population, colorful and having a variety of different traits and variations. But because there was this big extinction event during sometime around the last ice age, and only a few of them survived, those cheetahs squeezed through that bottleneck of near extinction, and they came out on the other end, and they have repopulated but their diversity has declined as a result of that bottleneck. So we had 3 alleles at one time. Now we only have 2, and as a result, we are reduced in the number of traits that we can have. In the original simulator, we had I think 6 different phenotypes that we could express, or there might have been 7, and now we only have 2 in this case. Well, 3, I guess, if you count purple. So the important thing about bottlenecks is to recognize that the population experiences a catastrophic event. Almost everybody dies. It's not like Founder effect where the original population is still around. Almost everybody dies. And again, the survivals are random. They're not surviving because of increased fitness. It's because they just got super lucky. And so we notice that there's a big reduction in the diversity of that population because most everybody died. And so you're going to lose some genes that would be, otherwise be in that population. But there was a catastrophic event and most of them died off. So I hope that this video helps a little bit with being able to explain the role of randomness in evolution with particular reference to the Founder effect and bottleneck effect.